Sidney Johnston and lay him by the tree. The tree stood right there for a long time. There are pictures of it. It used to have a fence around it as well. I don't know if you've seen those pictures or not, but this is where he dies. They said the pool of blood, and everybody knows he's hit in the back of the leg and dies from loss of blood, popliteal artery. And he dies right here. The question I think Bruce asked, did this one hurt worse than Stonewall or less or what? And that's one of those what if questions. I think it's safe to say that nobody that came along after Johnston did any better. I don't know that, you know, Bragg or Joseph E. Johnston or any of those could conceivably say I had a better track record than Johnston. Although Johnston's track record with Fort Donelson and all that is not very good, neither was Bragg, you know. To me, I look at Johnston and I think, you know, he died so early, and we don't know what he would have turned out. And I've heard the comparisons, of course, of Robert E. Lee. Had Robert E. Lee been killed at Mechanicsville or Beaver Dam Creek or Gaines Mill or something like that, so one of the 7 days, early in the 7 days, his track record up to then, particularly in Western Virginia and then even in Charleston and the first couple of days of the 7 days campaign were stumbling and didn't do very good. And we would have probably looked at Robert E. Lee and said, you know, this guy wasn't very good at all. He never would have made anything. Would Johnston have gone on to be the Robert E. Lee had he lived? Who knows? That's something we'll never be able to tell. But the fact that he does die here, of course, ends any knowledge of that. It's pure speculation. He's taken back to his headquarters. They examine the body. They find out he's been hit 4 times. Only one penetrated the skin, the one behind his right leg. Then they take him to Corinth. They clean the body, and he lays in state for the people of Corinth there for a little while. Then he's taken to New Orleans and buried in the plot down there. And of course, that's in mid-April or so by the time he gets down there. What happens on April the 25th, 28th? New Orleans is captured, and so Johnston spends the rest of the war in an occupied city. And I've always wondered if there was anybody, you know, any of the Federals went out to visit Johnston's grave, or if I've never seen any reference to it or not, but that's kind of interesting. Obviously, after the war, he was taken to Texas then. Anybody been to, probably have, Texas, but where y'all from, Austin? Y'all from?
No, we're from Houston.
Houston, okay. Buried in the State Cemetery at Austin, and one of the, I'm not a very emotional person, but one of the moving things is when I first went to the cemetery there and saw the big, the big thing there, and he's laying there and all that. But and this is when I was working at the park, and you read April 6, 1862 on his death date. Is kind of interesting, and to think, I lived in park housing up here, and think he died a mile or so. Mile and a half from my house. Buried out here in Texas. Kind of moving. Kind of finish the story a little bit. So, Albert Sidney Johnston. We walked basically in his footsteps. We've seen mostly where he was today. Of course, we can't, definitively put any of this at exactly the same spot. Even with the monument up there and where he was wounded and so on, and even the death site is in dispute. We all know Wiley Sword's contention that he died one ravine up. And he's taken me out there and showed me there and so on, and I never have really been a proponent of that. I will say this though, I'm still not convinced wholeheartedly, but to hear him describe it, it makes a lot more sense, him describing his thought process and so on, than it is just reading what is in the appendix of his book and so on. He's pretty convincing on it, but I still probably, if I had to bet my life on it, I would probably bet that Harris had it right here. So that's the end of Johnston. Any questions on Albert Sidney?
What do you think if he lives, if he's not shot, and he's still in command from 2:30 on? What do you think the difference is?
Here again, I depart from some historians. Charlie Rowland, of course, if you read his biography of Johnston, makes the claim that he would have continued the attacks when Beauregard called him off, and even despite the terrain and all that he would have gotten his men to do things that Beauregard couldn't get them to do, and that no other generals could get them to do. And he has a lot of, behind that. He got them to do this when he couldn't get them to do. So the personal charisma thing, I'm not sure I totally agree with that. By that point, I'm not sure that, and I always make the joke that it doesn't matter whether it's Beauregard or Johnston or Napoleon or Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain in command out there, and nobody's going to get them to take that hill. So I'm more of the school of thought that I don't think even Johnston could have. It's just too late in the day. The troops are too tired, and there's too many Federals and gunboats and everything else defending the landing. So I'm not sure it would have made a difference.
That's kind of my thing.
Okay.
I mean, I was just going to say, in reality, the attack kind of started sweeping off toward the northwest,
right,
like they were sweeping away from the landing again.
Right.
And I just kind of wonder if Johnston would have done that same thing.
Yeah.
Because now he thinks he really is on Grant's left flank.
Left flank, yeah.
So.
The thing that really makes me wonder, I'm not sure Johnston would have made any major difference in late in the day. I think they still surround the Hornet's Nest. I think they still, go after the landing and all of that. If there is any difference, and we'll talk about this when we start kind of day 2, Beauregard's big blunder to me is not in calling off the assaults on the first day. In fact, I think there's ample evidence, and part of this Robert A. Smith report that I found, and never been published or anything like that. He says we started back before we even got the order. We made up our minds that we're not doing this, that line can't be taken, and we're just not going to do it. So there's other evidence that Beauregard's decision is really not the major factor in calling off the assaults. The troops on the ground are the ones that are saying, "Hey, we're not doing this." If Johnston would have lived, he could have made a difference. Beauregard, I said all that to say this: that wasn't Beauregard's big blunder. Beauregard's big blunder is during the night, and I think this is when really the key decisions that Shiloh are made. I think we talked about this last week or last year. Grant could have still lost the battle during the night by retreating, and there are a lot of Union generals that are talking retreat and planning getting out of here. Sherman's the most famous, and he admits it later on, that I came to talk about retreat with Grant, but got cold feet, and he said, he just blurted out, "We've had the devil's own day today," and Grant says, "Of course, we'll lick them tomorrow." Beauregard's big decision is in not reorganizing the Army and getting the Army prepared. He just basically tells them, "All right, boys, just lay down and sleep and do whatever." There's no preparation whatsoever in the Confederate Army. Had Johnston lived, I'm not so sure that he would have taken so lackadaisical an attitude. He might have had a little more reorganization, and as a result, might have been a little more prepared the next morning when Beauregard is caught flat-footed and a mile back from the two major terrain features that he could have used to repel a Union advance on the morning of April the 7th, Dale Branch and Tillman Branch. We just saw how terrain affects, psyche, and y'all didn't even want to go down that hill, much less somebody shooting at you and all that. My contention is that had the Confederates been prepared on the morning of April the 7th, they potentially could have stopped cold Grant's and Buell's and Lew Wallace's, everybody's movement across Dale Branch and Tillman Branch by using the terrain, and you could have sheltered yourselves from the gunboats. Everybody says, well, the gunboats are there and all that, but we know from the night before that the gunboats couldn't hit the Confederate soldiers right there because they have to elevate the guns too high and fire over the blank, So the gunboats are kind of almost a non-factor there. So could the Confederates have held at Tillman Branch and Dale Branch like Grant did the night before? And they are overpowered, they're outnumbered, Grant and Buell have fresh troops and so on, but what's telling to me is that 2 or 3 or 4 hours later, when the Federals finally do move out that mile and finally do meet Confederate resistance, what happens? We're going to talk about this on the second day. The Confederates stop them cold on level ground. They stop them dead in their tracks the whole way through. On level ground, what could they have done on the official ground in good terrain, good defensive terrain? So had Johnston lived, he would have done a little bit more preparation during the night. That's why I say Beauregard's big blunder in the real decision-making process during the night, and Beauregard just blew it at that time. But of course, he's a little, looking back, he's a little overconfident. He thinks we got the thing won. There's no use in reorganizing. We got it won. There's nothing to reorganize for. So we're getting a little bit into day 2 stuff. We're a little bit late for lunch already, so let's head on up to lunch. We'll answer any other questions and so on while we're doing that. How far have we been?
7 miles, I believe.
7 miles. Let's go through